opportunities to be in different sessions with you, webinars on professional development. But for those of you who may not know who I am, my name is Sonja Alexander. I am the Director of Professional Learning for Corwin. I have had this fine position for the last 4 years, and I transitioned out of K-12. I'd been a teacher, a social worker, assistant principal, district leader, and so I'm right at home with my peeps, all of you who are here to continue to learn and to grow. That's what it's about. But I also want to tell you what Corwin is about, because this national roundtable is very purposeful and intentional based upon who we are as an organization. So as you can see, we believe that all children can learn, and that all means all. Knowing our impact is a privilege and a responsibility. Education is the cornerstone of a just, stable, and thriving society. The fierce urgency of now is reflected daily in our work and our actions, and every child deserves that great education, not by chance, but by design. So a lot of the solutions that we partner with others to provide is to make sure that we are committed to those beliefs. And we know that excellence cannot exist without equity. Our mission must be to reach all students. And so when we say all means all, we really, really mean that. So just make sure you continue to let us know, that you're here, and continue to go in the chat box. And but yeah, I wanted to start this off so that you all know that this is who we are as an organization. And I'm very proud to have done the years that I've done and continue to do in this great field of education, and now be a part of an organization that really philosophically stands for what I know each of you believe on this webinar today. So as I welcome each of you leaders from across the country who are joining us today, I want to say a shout out to our live Facebook stream. So hopefully our Facebook Live people are out there enjoying us. You can see on the agenda today that in our panel discussion, we will be sharing resources in the chat box, but when we head into breakouts, we're going to have an even deeper discussion around the things that are critically important to you and that are in your thoughts. So this is a critical time in our nation. Very critical. Never before have we faced so many crises at one time. I mean, we have economic, and we have social and racial and health. And with the pandemic has truly come I think awakening for us, and it has exacerbated the inequities we always knew existed. So the question we face now as leaders, each and every one of you on the webinar and others out there, is how are we going to respond to these multiple challenges? How do we lead our students, our staff, our communities, our families forward? And I want to just tell you that each of you are heroes, because the work that we are doing as educators is critical to what tomorrow will look like for our great nation and our great world. But as leaders, we're faced with knowing how to respond to those challenges. So as we consider the mission of Corwin, the mission that each of you have, we are going to make sure that we move forward in a way to be most responsive. So one of the things I'd like for you to put in the chat right now is, what's your why? Why is this topic and being a part of this national roundtable of interest for you today? And what do you hope to learn today? Not just from this wonderful panel, but from each other. So please start placing in the chat right now. It's important for us to be collaborative in this webinar. What is your why? And how will you move forward as a leader to respond in a way that addresses the why? And as you engage in this webinar today with the leaders in the roundtable, what do you want to take from this so that you can continue to support that why? One of the ways that we address the why is our deep equity framework. And so at Corwin, we are fortunate to have, we think, some of the best researchers and consultants and just knowledgeable educators and leaders from throughout the world. And one of our great leaders on equity is Gary Howard. And a few years back, Gary was open to partnering with us because his mission and our mission of leading so that all meant all was the same. And so what you'll learn about today is our deep equity framework, which is a 5-phase model for systemic equity transformation. And what we believe is sustainability and building capacity. All of the answers do not belong with one person. The answer is in the room, and the answer is on this webinar. And so this framework is very intentional and thoughtful about how do we develop that capacity of leadership within our schools and our districts to make sure that we all own the process of this systemic transformation of equity. And so we use a train-the-trainer approach to build that capacity, lead, and sustain the work. But this only shares a piece of this amazing framework. And so today in the roundtable, the leaders that are with us are going to give us an indication of not only what this framework looks like, because you can read it now, or you can go on our webpage and read it, and I hope you see the aspects of this framework, but what does it feel like when you're in the middle of transforming a system that leads with equity? And what does it sound like? What are the conversations like? This is not about shame or blame, my friends. We are all in this together. And the more we understand that to build bridges, we have to consider and we have to embrace, we have to understand our differences in order to cross those bridges to transforming our equity challenges and those things that are oftentimes seen as barriers. And so this deep equity framework, I will not be able to tell you about it as best as our leaders on the panel today. So as we move forward, let me tell you who is with us. And I am so excited for so many reasons. One, that we're able to do this great work, but that we're able to see the impact of this great work in districts and schools, with teachers, with leaders, with students, with families. So our discussion leaders today are Scott Helton, who is superintendent of DuPage 88 School District, Illinois. And they're gonna wave their hands as I call them out so you all know who they are. And this is right outside of Chi-Town. I saw somebody who provided a shout out to Chicago. Waldo Alvarado, who is Director of Equity in Reading School District in Pennsylvania, which is right outside of Philly. So Waldo is giving a shout out. David Maxwell, who is in the trenches as a principal at Valley High School in West Des Moines, Iowa, which is also right there in the midst of the city and what's happening. And Heidi Harris, who is the Assistant Superintendent of Auburn School District in Washington, and that's the state. So we're excited to have them with us today. They have many, many things to share in our webinar, but so many other opportunities, and they will make themselves available to you as we end this webinar to respond to any questions or, just thoughts that you may have as you are each on your journey towards a transformation for systemic equity, embedded within your schools and your districts. So here to facilitate this today is my friend, my partner, Benji Howard. One of the things that I didn't mention, I guess, in my introduction is I am a deep equity consultant, and I identify myself as an equity leader. There are many things that I'm passionate about, and leading for equity is one of them. But I have been fortunate to learn from Wade and from leaders such as Benji Howard, who will be leading our sessions today. As well, Benji is the co-founder of Yes, and you will learn more about Yes as we continue. And he's just that leader who is committed to dismantling barriers that impact our ability to have equitable places and spaces for our educators, for our students, and for our families. So Benji, as you probably can hear in that last name, Howard, is really connected to Gary Howard. So knowing about equity has been Benji's life. It's been the commitment of Benji and the family of the Howards, and I know that personally, but I am excited to hand this over to Benji. He's going to take us through the rest of our session, and I welcome each of you again, and I'm thankful that you chose to be in this roundtable today.
All right. Thank you, Sanja. Beautiful introduction. Thank you so much. And, you know, as Wade said, you do sometimes appear to us as the CEO of this organization, but you are the Director of Professional Learning for Corwin Press. And more than that, I think I feel pretty confident in calling you my sister. Is that all right?
Yes.
You know, because we've been on this journey together. Wade, thank you so much for bringing us in, my brother, bringing us in with the music and your spirit. It's so important to keep the arts alive in these conversations. You know, this isn't an academic conversation. This is a human conversation, and music helps to remind us of that.
That's right. Thank you, Benji.
You know, yeah. And I like your new background, by the way.
Oh, yeah, right. I spent quite a bit of time painting it this morning just for this session.
You know, I'm really excited to introduce our roundtable because, you know, we put a lot of thought into this conversation that we're going to have today. But before I do that, Sanja, you kind of kicked it off, and we'll go a little deeper into the conversation. But before we even get there, we want to do what we do all the time, and that is to begin with a young person's perspective. And we reached out not too long ago to our good friend Ray Claiborne, who is from Detroit, Michigan. She is now at Fisk, sophomore at Fisk University. We started working with Ray. I believe you were a sophomore in high school, Ray, at Summit Academy North in Detroit, Michigan. Since then, we have shared some pretty crazy adventures together. You are also a youth equity stewardship. So you were a youth equity steward in high school. You were also a youth equity steward ambassador. You joined us on an 8-day river trip on the Colorado River through Grand Canyon to really go deeper into this idea of how we grow our capacity to support our communities, both our human cultural communities, but also the land. And you have been, you know, with us on that journey for about 4 years now. And we wanted to kick off with you. You are by no means, you are a feminist, but you by no means speak for all women. You are a Black Lives activist, but you by no means speak for all Black people. You are a young person, but you by no means speak for all young people. That said, we're a bunch of adults trying to figure out how to do school here in the fall. And so as of now, you are the ambassador, the spokesperson for all young people. We have one person, and it's so important for us to listen to you first before we dive into dialogue. So Ray, we reached out to you, and you felt like you would like to kick us off here in our conversation today with 5 points that you feel like educators, especially educational leaders, need to know in this critical time in history. Would you be willing to help us kick off our conversation, Ray?
Yes,
this is your walk-up tune right here. And, you know, first of all, how were you with a little bit of that Beyonce? Because we talked about Beyonce yesterday.
Oh, yeah. I was singing along to it. I forgot I still had my video on. So I was like, try to keep it to a minimum. But yeah.
All right, everybody. This is our good friend, Ray Claiborne.
Let's give it up for Ray, everybody. Thank you so much for sharing your words, Ray.
I just have 5 things that I think all educators should know when going back to teaching their students in the fall. And at the top of the list is something that has been repeated numerous times, but I feel needs to be said one more time. Things are not going to go back to normal, and that's okay. We need to embrace them not going back to normal, because our normal was Black lives not mattering. Our normal was polluted ecosystems. Our normal was to a few what was held to the most. So I think that we need to embrace that change that's going on right now and adapt to it. The second thing that I think all educators should know is We are not just students. We are trying to manage just like you are. I'm a daughter of a teacher, so I know how it's a double life. It literally is. And I think that from the educator's perspective, we also had to see that with our students too. I have a friend from Compton, California. She's been on her own since 15, and on top of grades, especially with the pandemic going on, she was worrying about how she was, when she was going to eat, where she was going to sleep, where she was going to bathe, and all that on top of finishing her finals. And she did it beautifully, but it was only because her educators understood that she had so much going on with her life. So I think that's something we need to understand with our students when we come back to teach them in the fall. The third point is a really important point to me. There's no neutrality in this time, so don't even try to shoot for it. Like, I know that's the safe place to go. It's like, I'm neutral on the subject. I'm not going to talk about that. Now's not the time to do that. He who passively accepts evil is as much involved in it as he who helps to perpetrate it. He who accepts evil without protesting against it is really cooperating with it. That is from everybody's favorite, MLK. We get that in a time like this, we have to start normalizing that there is no specific time to talk about injustices. You know, when we come into the classroom, when we go into the Zoom meetings, however you guys are going back to school, we can't put social justice in this little time frame. It's going to be talked about, let it happen. It's going to be incorporated, let it happen. You're going to have to run into it, let it happen. If you don't stand for something, you're going to fall for everything. So yes, you have to take a side. Like, again, there's no neutrality in this. You have to take a side. We cannot settle on things like equity and our lives and humanity. And I know this because a very close educator to me, who's like a mentor, who's really like family, Lucy Harmon. She's English 11th and 12th grade teacher at my old high school, Summit Academy North. And she never in her life took the side of neutrality, or at least while she was teaching. She never took the side of neutrality. She always made it a point to make a stance on something, to be the person that caused the rift in the water. And I think that's what all educators should shoot for people like her and my mom, because her, especially as a white woman teaching a majority Black, brown, and rural white faces, she started those uncomfortable conversations even when they weren't included in the curriculum. The fourth thing that I think is also important is educators. You guys are teaching the revolutionaries that you teach about in history. To explain that, we learn about the revolutionaries for the American Revolution. We learn about the Martin Luther Kings and the Rosa Parks. Realize that you're teaching them right now, like they're sitting right in front of you. Do you want to be the person who puts that flame out for them, or do you want to be the accelerant to that? Do you want to be the person that they look back to, like how I look at Lucy Harmon and say, this is the person who helped propel me to do better? Or do you want to be the person that they look back at and think, this is the person that tried to stop me from reaching my goals? Choose wisely. I think it's important to teach us to grasp problems from the root issue, because the reason why we are the way that we are right now in this time is because we haven't been grasping things by the root. We've kind of been putting a bandage over it and ignoring it and pushing it off to the side. And that's why this time now, it is important that we accept this change and that we realize the power that we have, both us as students, but you guys especially as educators. My last and final point is teach history for what it is. This means that we can't just teach what's in the books. We can't just teach what's in the curriculum, because that's how you produce cogs in a machine. And I don't think that anyone got into the educational system to just produce another cog in the machine. You did this for your own personal reasons, and for that, we thank you. As the daughter of a teacher, I thank you. But to do that, that means that you have to go that extra mile. We often end up glorifying and excusing the villains of the story, and we villainize the actual victims or survivors of the story in history. And we have to be very conscious with that and point out the problematic things in the past and how they've carried on into the future, and point out our own problematic behaviors, because we are making history right now. I'm pretty sure this is going to be somewhere in the textbooks, and you want to be on the right side of it. An example of this, I have a friend and she's a Black trans woman, and it took her until she turned 18 to actually figure out who started the Stonewall movement, because her entire life, when they taught about that type of stuff in history, it was the same white cis gay man that was on the cover of it. It's important to show representation. It's important to teach history for what it is. So just take these things back with you when you go to teach your students. We love you guys. We do appreciate you very much. And we hope that you guys have a good time teaching us in this weird system that we have going on here.
Yeah, Ray.
Ray, thank you so much for joining us and taking the time out of your busy college schedule right now, but just beautiful. And I just watching the chat here, a lot of shout outs to you and your voice and what you have to offer to kick us off as adults. How do you feel being the spokesperson for all young people in America right now?
Oh God, I'm sweating. I'm so nervous.
Yeah, lots of, somebody's saying you rock. People are saying thank you. Wise beyond your years is a comment from Charlene. You're an incredible young lady. Thank you for your words of wisdom. So again, I echo that. A lot of people are feeling it right now. So thank you, Ray, for joining us. Please stay so you can hear from some adult. You okay with that? All right.
All right. Hey, Ray, I think it's about time we hear from the adult voice. So let's hear from the spokesperson for the adult community.
Yeah.
Benji.
Yeah. Well, we chose four spokespeople to speak for all adults in American education.
Yeah, we do.
But on a serious note, I really want to honor the four people that we have on our roundtable today. All of you are good friends of ours. We've been on this journey together. And in thinking about, how to put together a roundtable to talk about equity work, especially in this particular time in history, our thinking was that we would reach out to folks who, all of you brought our teams. So our deep equity teams, the Corwin body of work, deep equity, and then the work that Wade and I do with youth equity stewardship. You brought us into your districts to help support systemic change initiatives. But the reality is that you and the communities that you serve have really shifted our thinking and allowed us to be more courageous in our practice and allowed us to go deeper in the work. So the learning has been totally reciprocal in all four of your districts. The question that we wanted to kick off with is really around the understanding that we are, like Ray said, we're in a critical time in history. We will look back on this as a critical time. We have to make decisions on what side of history we're on. And all of you are educational leaders who we admire very much for your ability to build the foundations for really what my dad, like Sanja mentioned Gary Howard, Dad would refer to as leading for equity rather than managing diversity, really laying the foundation so that we manifest the outcomes that we want to see. So the first question is really around laying the foundation. I've kind of done some thinking around each one of you and the things that we admire about you. And I wanted to kick off with you, Scott, because, and also, Dr. Scott Helton is the superintendent of DuPage 88 School District in the Chicago area. You serve a really diverse community, kind of spanning from sort of what might be referred to as urban reality to suburban reality. Some changing demographics in your district over the last few years. Your district has also become kind of a leader in your region as far as that idea of leading for equity and building these foundations. You've done a lot of work around strategy along with your colleague, Dr. Barbanente in DuPage, Scott. And, I have to say, when I first met you, I was like, man, this guy looks like he might come from where I come from. Small town, white America. And I resonated with you around that, but I also just admire the work that you all have done in DuPage around being strategic in your thinking, getting community buy-in, And I'm wondering if you would share with us a little bit about like the foundations that you've built in DuPage 88 to do this equity work.
Absolutely. Thanks for this tremendous opportunity, Benji, Wade, Corwin. It's interesting. Our journey started in 2014, 2015, after we took our Black student leadership team out to the theater. We watched Mandela, and I just said, hey, how are we doing as a district? And the kids said, you really want to know? I said, I want to know. And after about an hour-long conversation, we realized I needed to bring those students over for a day. And we went after everything from employment practices to discipline. And we realized we needed to conduct an equity audit. Well, an equity audit just reinforced the voice of the kids and gave me the leverage for the board, to go out and find some people who can make systemic change. So as we, our leadership team, the first read we did together was white teachers, multicultural classrooms. You can't teach what you don't know. We hired your dad through Corwin. We brought you guys in because what we thought we would do, you got to remember, Chicago is in a blue state. We're butted right up against Chicago, and I'm in a red county. Okay, so if you make change differently and you get your county involved, they'll vote your school board out, and then those new people will vote your superintendent out. So we made a pact after we got that equity audit. Gene and I saw it over the weekend, and we were like, all right, let's just take a few days and just take a deep breath, because it was disturbing. It was bad. We weren't anywhere near where we thought we'd be. So we enlisted you guys to come in, and we worked, with our kids, and we started with our equity task force, and your dad came in and trained the trainers, and we embedded this thing from within. We didn't go out to the community. We stayed internal only. Now, what we also did strategically is we work with our school board. And then in Illinois, we have districts where we have high school districts and grade school districts. I have 3 grade school districts around me. And we had your dad, Gary Howard, led workshops with districts 4, 45, 48, and 88. So he was working with our school boards too, while he was training our trainers, and we were immersing ourselves, into deep equity, culturally responsive teaching, and youth equity stewardship simultaneously. So we were kind of building that fabric, that whole piece from top to bottom. And we just, our thing was, there wasn't a point in time early on where we wanted to get the community involved. I mean, fast forward now, last year, if you look at our strategic plan, it's about college, career, and culturally ready. We've got equity statements throughout it, and it's about achievement for all students. We had these all white high schools called advanced placement high schools. No more. 42% of kids in our AP classes are kids of color, and that's huge. And we had our highest pass rate in the last 10 years this year. So we're making change because of the dialogue and the very foundation that you guys put in place. And, from the, tone and trust, the culture and climate, and embedding it into our strategic plan. Your work has just been phenomenal. And it's interesting because we go from not wanting the community involved to June 4th, June 14th, June 27th, we supported our students and alums, and we had 3 Black Lives Matter rallies, protests, marches, voter registration, fundraisers, you name it. And these were led by our kids and our alums alongside of administration, teachers. And, but we've leveraged our community because of the great things we've done to pull that in. So the foundation was built from the students and the adults working together on different levels. So we owe you guys, and this summer, when all this, right after the tragic events of George Floyd's death on May 25th, first people we called was you, because we needed structure. We needed conversation every week this summer, and you guys connected with us and did it. So that's kind of where we're at.
Thanks, Scott. And this whole thing did start because it was your idea. This conversation we're having right now, you and me talking on the phone at like 9 p.m. on a Sunday, my time. So, and I'm on the West Coast. Thank you, for kicking this idea out there. Heidi, I wanted to reach out to you. Also, just a good friend and just someone who we admire so much. You are, you're the assistant superintendent of student learning in Auburn School District. So that's Auburn, Washington, on the West Coast here. You are working in a incredibly, like a rapidly changing district. In the last 5 years, your demographics have shifted quite noticeably. Your districts, I think you have about 40% white students, maybe 30% Hispanic, but you also serve a lot of other diversities, African American, You serve the Muckleshoot tribe as well as some other Native American families and students. You have a pretty large Pacific Islander population there in Auburn. We've been with you for, I think, going on 6 years. And I'd love for you to share kind of some of your ideas from Auburn School District around the sustainability of this. How do you keep this work going? How do you keep the iron hot when you have this kind of dynamic where people get initiative-itis in school districts? Something comes in and then it moves out. But you've really been able to sustain this work and look at the long vision. I'm just wondering if you have anything that you could share with us around how you do that as a district.
Absolutely. I appreciate the opportunity to be with the group this afternoon. We are passionate in Auburn about our kids, about our teachers, and about growing into a better place, right? For kids, for teachers, and for especially our family and our greater community. We have this interesting balance, right? As we go into this work, as you mentioned, we're a district that is rapidly changing. In the state of Washington, we are in the top 10 as far as size of districts go, Seattle, Spokane being biggest. With 17,000 students, we come in normally somewhere between 7th and 10th. So we're considered large, right, on this side of the United States, which means moving people, right, as far as culture and beliefs. And we really think about what it means that culture eats strategy for breakfast, but following that, knowing that there are some things that we have to do strategically, and there are things that we have to observe so that the culture comes along with that, in acknowledging our history. So one of those things is, our average tenure of our teachers is 22 years. We don't have a lot of turnover, and that's different than in some places. We have students and they come back and become our teachers, and their parents are still teachers in the district, and their cousins are our para-educators and our bus drivers. And there's a lot of Auburn people cycling back through Auburn in leadership and in staff roles. And what's that's meant for our equity work is we weren't ready, right? We weren't ready as our demographic shifted. We weren't ready to think of how to meet needs of people who weren't white middle-class people. And so part of our work began when we met Gary and Benji and Wade a few years ago at an annual Visible Learning Conference, and sat through and participated with our middle school principals in the Deep Equity one-day training, and started asking questions about how do we help our students? How do we know our students and support our students better? And quickly realized, as we had our first of 3 two-year cohorts of Deep Equity in the district, and that we weren't even talking the same language as each other, right? We didn't have a common vocabulary. We were saying words to each other that were shutting each other down because we didn't know how to even talk about equity, how to talk about race, how to talk about our biases. So we started with some of those really tactical kinds of things. And now as we progressed through our years and built the common vocabulary, had some understanding, we've really seen the link between what our personal journey is and what our professional practice can be. And we're really at the point now of how do we make really real in our everyday practice some of those things that had to start with some technical, definitions or all. 3 years ago, we were one of the first districts in the state of Washington to write a school board policy that was an equity policy. Again, one of those technical moves, but now our why about the reason we have this policy is to make these beliefs an actuality in our everyday classroom. So the journey through both Deep Equity and then the YES cohorts that we've had have served to make us aware and to teach us how do we live this every day. The thing that constantly trips us up is intent versus impact, right? We have intent when we go to make a change, do something new. We think we're doing the right thing. And we often get caught up in the defense piece of, but I meant to, not having the discussion, the honest discussion about, but what was the impact, right? What was the impact to our family, our students, and all? So we're practicing that, and we're giving people and ourselves in the system permission to really examine what do we want our impact to be, and how do we keep that open dialogue in this process.
Thank you, Heidi. I have actually like 4 questions. I want to make sure we get all of our, but I just want you to know that we've really admired and learned a lot from your intentionality and the district's thinking about connecting. You know, if we're talking about real change happening, the way that you all have connected the personal, the professional, the organizational, and really ultimately societal pieces of that. Systemic change happens because people are able to change, and you've been so intentional about how that, like you were just expressing, how that happens. So thank you for joining us today. I want to introduce my good friend David Maxwell, principal at West Des Moines High School in West Des Moines, Iowa. Man, you have just, again, like all of you, just helped us to expand our thinking about what systemic change looks like. At your high school, you've done a lot of work around connecting the dots with student energy and adult learning. And I'd love to hear some of your thinking about what that looks like, students and adults working together to really manifest equity at Valley High School. Would you be willing to share a little bit with us about what that looks like at Valley? David? David,
Sorry.
yeah, you're
There we go. I'm
muted.
sorry.
There you go. Yeah, thank you.
Can you hear
Good
me
to
now?
see you, my friend.
Hey, it's great seeing you guys as well. Okay, so first of all, I just want to say, I have to say thank you to Corwin, to Sabrina and Charlene, Wade and Benji. You guys are more than friends. You guys are my brothers, and I so appreciate just this opportunity. The fact that I'm speaking to other educators in the current reality that we're in, whether we're returning to school online or virtually or on-site and in person. I just want to say I'm seriously humbled to have this opportunity to speak from this place. As a principal at Valley High School, and I know I'm speaking to the choir when I say this. I've been watching the chat. It starts with relationships, building those relationships with kids, building those relationships with teachers as well. In the chat, there's been a lot of comments about an equity audit. We completed an equity audit back in 2015, 2016 school year. And you're absolutely right. That is the perfect place to start in thinking about systemic change that you want to do in your school or in your district. You have to start with the data. And the data, it will be very clear and evident, especially when you start looking at the disproportionate rates in terms of suspensions or attendance or the achievement gap and enrollment in AP classes versus some of the remedial classes. I'm starting my 16th year at Valley, and 13 of those I was an associate principal, and I'm starting my 3rd year as the principal. And as an African-American educator in Iowa, I'll tell you, I got into education to eliminate the achievement gap, at least in the school and the community where I serve. And when I saw the data after the audit, I can't even describe how heartbroken and how just inept I felt. It was because I'm serving these kids, and yet it took me, and part of this whole process is just growth and not being afraid to be vulnerable and not being afraid to share your own shortcomings and your short-sightedness, and where there are opportunities for growth. But I'm so thankful that we've had this journey. As a result of the equity audit, one of the recommendations was that we create a frame, that we start using a framework for professional learning, professional development. And I saw Michelle Soria, she's a part of this conversation as well. And I just want to say hi, Michelle. She is actually the one who mentioned the deep equity framework that Gary has done. And the piece that I liked about it the most, there were two actually. The first one was that it had a student component to it, and that's the yes, the youth equity stewardship. The other, we looked at 4 previously, and none of them had a student component, but deep equity did. The other piece were the 5 phases, and that first phase, as I was reviewing it, it was that tone and trust. You have to create that tone and trust, because if people don't feel comfortable talking and sharing those vulnerabilities, you're not going anywhere. And the tone and trust piece talked specifically around the shame and blame. You know, when we think about, and I hate to use the word diversity training because it has such negative connotations associated with it, because I feel so many times people have felt like they're being blamed. You know, this current climate of inequity, of race, of racism, of social injustice in our country, this is not anything that anybody in this generation has created. This is something that we've all inherited. It's a part of our nation's history. I don't want to go into too much into the achievement gap piece, but it's part of our nation's history. It's not something which has just, happened over the last 20 years, the last 50 years. It's been with our country since its inception. So again, talking to our fellow educators and letting them know that we're not blaming you, but we're trying to make you aware of what is happening for some of our kids, especially our kids of color, and some of the experiences that they're having in school, which unintentionally puts them behind or moves, it doesn't allow them to grow as quickly as others. So, as a building leader, I've just learned that you have to build that tone and trust within your school climate, your school community. You have to engage students and empower them to use their voices. So when we get to the breakouts, I'll go more into detail with that, but that's kind of things that I've learned so far in my own personal journey with equity.
Thank you, David. As you're speaking, I'm just, in my mind, I got all these powerful young people that are in your high school that are just, I think like everyone on this roundtable right now have had student-led professional development. So you actually have students leading professional development in your district, which I think is, that didn't come from us. That wasn't our idea. That came from your districts. Well, thank you, David. I want to introduce another really close friend, Waldo Alvarado from Reading, Pennsylvania. Waldo, you are the Director of Equity and Diversity for Reading. You serve in some ways a really unique district, in some ways just an American district. I believe, I'm looking at my notes here, you serve about 18,000 students, 95 of which are students of color. And about 85% of those are Hispanic. You have a high Dominican and Puerto Rican immigrant population in your district. Mm-hmm. You have the challenges of, like many American districts, you've got challenges of a lot of low-income families. I see right behind you, you've got you call your high school the Citadel, right?
Well, actually, this is the castle on the hill.
Oh, the castle on the hill, yeah. Walking into that building, man, is just like one of the biggest, craziest, coolest buildings we've ever worked in. Again, you're one of those people who we admire and who has helped us shift our thinking and go deeper into this work. Your district is also, you and your colleague, Dr. Momeen, your superintendent, have made huge strides in shifting the data around attendance, around test scores, student-teacher relationship. But you also have the challenges of highly diverse, mostly black and brown, serving mostly black and brown families, mostly white teaching staff. Am I right?
That is correct. Yes.
And yet you've won awards. I believe it's the It's the Mid-Atlantic Equity Consortium gave you a national award for your efforts in equity and social justice
That's
last
right.
year, and want to celebrate that, but also just kind of hear from you around how did you build the foundation, especially when you have the dynamic, like many districts where you have, Latino, Black families, mostly white teachers. How do you build the foundation for leading for equity in that context?
Well, first of all, I would like to say thank you so much, Corwin, Benji, Wade, Sanja. It is such a pleasure to be here, at the national level. And I just want to do a big shout out to one of our principals that is in the audience, Tracy Webb. Welcome. I'm so glad that you're here with us.
All right, Tracy, give it up for Tracy.
Yes. So going back to your question, I can summarize our idea when it comes to, our teaching staff and our students. And the idea is this, when equity doesn't show up in human resources, our kids will suffer. So there's substantial evidence, that educators of colors, they bring so many benefits to all the students. And the truth of the matter is that they are so impactful. However, they are significantly underrepresented, nationwide. I guess the statistics are that less than 20% of educators in our public system in the U.S., are educators of color. So that's the reality. In Pennsylvania, we have about 5% of teachers of color. And then in our district, we are around 7-8%. So, I would like just to give you some recommendations on some of the things that we're doing. And I'm pretty sure that you have some tools at your disposal when it comes to recruitment, screening, hiring, retention, promotion of educators of color. But I just want to point out some of the pieces that we have been building up in the last few years, because we began this work actually 5 years ago with Gary Howard, and we have gone through also the Youth Equity Stewardship Program. So one of the things that we are doing out of the box is that we just hire, and we have a new chief executive of operations, and he's in charge of human resources. And one of the things that he does is he's very active, intentional, and very deliberate, in his recruitment efforts. He will go to the city park, he will set up a table, and he will have, applications, and he will be with a loudspeaker just saying hello to people, come over here, using English, Spanish, and what have you. So that has been amazing for us. And of course, we do all the other stuff that school districts do, like agreement with colleges and universities when it comes to student teachers, coming into our buildings, and that a recruitment tool. We also have career pathways at the high school. And we also have some summer program with some colleges like UPenn. We have the SCOPE program. And with Alvernia University, we also have full scholarships, for 10 students going into education. But I just want to, highlight what one of our administrators is doing, and he calls this community outreach, and that is setting up tables, in the park, so to speak. The other piece that I want to say is that we have used Gary Howard's 7 principles of culturally responsive teaching. And we have used these basic ideas because Gary, he talks about principles like students, are affirmed in their cultural connections, teachers are personally inviting, the classroom is physically, and so forth. But then we have translated those behaviors and predispositions in the 7 principles into a belief system that people bring into the schoolhouse. So basically, we have gone into the screening and into the interviewing of potential teachers, and we are framing some questions around those deep core beliefs, beliefs about the environment of the school, beliefs about whom we should be teaching, beliefs about what and how to teach, beliefs about how to relate to students and the families, beliefs about how to troubleshoot, when we have some problems, beliefs about what makes for school success and it is so important for our brilliant kids to be successful. So basically, we have developed, a bank of interview questions using the 7 principles, using the lenses of social justice and equity. And we are in the process of providing anti-racial bias PD to all the staff involved in human resources. So basically, we know that the candidate pool for educators of color, is very limited, especially in Pennsylvania. In Pennsylvania, in the last 6 years, we have been a decrease of about 60% of new teaching certificates being issued by the Department of Education. 60%. So, and then of course, that only brings more challenges to what we're trying to do. The other piece that we're doing in Reading is we are committed to take good care of our teachers. Yes, we put students first, but we never leave our teaching force last. They need support. We need to take good care of them because this is about retention and attracting more across the board. So we have to build a positive culture, welcoming, inclusive, respectful. And when it comes to teachers of color, we need to support their adjustment to their community and neighborhoods. Believe it or not, sometimes one of the reasons they leave some district is because the neighborhood residents is not welcoming for them. So we have to be very mindful of that. And the other piece is that, yes, educators of colors are underrepresented, but sometimes overburdened, overworked, overused, with a lot of quote unquote assigned responsibilities. When I was a school counselor, I used to joke with this, that I have the dumping ground syndrome because they knew I was bilingual. They knew I was an advocate for equity. So basically, I got dumping a lot of, students, families, and so forth. School counselors, they usually have caseloads by grades, by alphabet. But then, I was doing pretty much a lot of the stuff. You become the official spokesperson for your group. You become the official interpreter, right? Mm-hmm. So we have to be very careful, and don't overburn our educators of color. And then the other piece, and I want to finish with this, our teaching force, they need ongoing professional development. And they also need supervision, not in the sense of formal evaluation, but in the sense of coaching, in the sense of, I'm here for you, do you need some help, and so forth. So we have been rolling out this training with deep equity on cultural competence. And we are using, again, Gary's Howard peer observation rubric of the 7 principles of cultural responsive teaching. So we also do equity visits. We do induction sessions based on the principles. And in some of our schools, they are doing neighborhood walks or community tours just to have our new teachers coming from outside the city to be exposed to the smells and the sounds of the city, so to speak. So again, I just want to say, when equity doesn't show up in human resources, our kids will hurt. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Waldo. And you, when you talk about new hires and when you talk about a teacher observation, peer observation process, and the 7 principles as a rubric, that's your foundational rubric, right? That you use to really grow practice. Right. Yes. And there was a question in the chat that came up around the 7 principles and whether or not folks can get access to them. So we will follow up. Corwin will follow up with everybody as long as we have your email with connections so that you can reach out to us. And some of these things like Waldo is referencing, like the 7 principles of culturally responsive teaching, we can make available. There's a lot more to that. There's a lot more depth, but we can at least make the principles available, and then we can make ourselves available to talk in more depth about how those can function, not only as a rubric, but a mechanism for growing your professional development and growing your practice. So, because of our time, I think what we'll do is we'll kind of fold this second question into the small group or breakout sessions, because, we wanted to hear from you all with regard to the foundations that you've built for Leading for Equity. But like Ray said at the beginning of our conversation, we're living in this critical time in history. We have a triple crisis of a global pandemic, which is affecting some communities much deeper and much more tragically than others. We are dealing with trying to offer school remotely, and we are dealing with the largest social uprising in my lifetime. And my father would even say, having been involved in the civil rights movement between 64 and 68, that this is bigger than that, where we are with regard to race relations and dealing with racism in our public education system. So the question for the breakouts is really, how are we leaning into it right now? If I'm to say, my own responses have ranged from throwing everything I got at the wall and seeing what sticks, to burying my head in the sand and pretending like it's not going on. And the third is really to look to my friends and colleagues around the country and learn how to be courageous right now, and how to be vulnerable and real in this moment in history. So let's carry that on, or carry that into our small groups, our breakout sessions. And hopefully you all have kind of renamed yourself, and we're going to kind of divide up. So Wade's going to join Scott in a conversation of folks who are kind of new, trying to grow equity initiatives in your district. Waldo and Heidi and Sanja are going to have a conversation with regard to sustaining the work, because it's not just about initiating, it's how do we keep this going, especially in this particular time in history. And then Dave and I are going to talk about what does this look like right now at the building level, especially with regard to bringing in young people to the conversation. So that's how we're kind of dividing up. We'll take a few moments. Wade, you're going to kick us in with a little music, and we're going to get into some smaller groups right now.